Climate change is a very serious subject, but this is a deeply unserious YouTube channel. So what are you going to expect besides a sarcastic top 10 list? It's the 10 US cities you should think about relocating to when the climate apocalypse comes, and it's coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content every Wednesday on cities and transportation. Viewer suggested topics always welcome. And I might have missed it, but I'm kind of shocked no one suggested this one. Because we've been talking about climate change for a long time, but it wasn't supposed to be something that was hitting for like another 30 or 40 years. Well, I've spent my whole life in the Pacific Northwest, but it wasn't until the last 5 years in Portland that I started seeing things like annual wildfires that destroyed towns and the air quality of the entire region. Once in 10,000 year heat dome events. And this past week, apparently, a record snow event that wasn't even forecast. And that's just Portland. Just about anywhere you live in the US, you've been seeing anomalous weather events. So it's definitely at the point where you have to think climate change isn't something that's a few decades away. It's just our annual reality now, and almost certainly getting worse. So what today is if things are really starting to hit the fan, which US cities should you move to? And look, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm a YouTuber who's a little too fond of cities for his own good. So when it comes to evaluating the vulnerability and resilience characteristics of different geographies, I'm just gonna defer to the experts. So in 2017, the Environmental Protection Agency released what they call the Climate Resilience Screening Index. The CRSI looks county by county and brings together indicators across 5 aspects or domains of climate resilience. Risk, which includes both the probability of different catastrophic events and potential of severe effects from, say, nuclear or toxic releases. Governance, which is things like how strong interagency coordination is. Society, which is things like socioeconomic demographics and availability of social services. Built environment, which is mostly the condition of things like housing stock, transportation infrastructure, and utilities infrastructure. And natural environment, which is like the health of local ecosystems. So there's kind of a grand irony at the heart of all this, which is, on the one hand, living in a big, dense city is, in general, good if you care about climate change. After all, urban living is less carbon intensive per capita than suburban or rural living. I think that's just math. But what I get from this EPA analysis is a lot of cities are going to be some of the worst places to live when climate devastation starts ramping up, both because cities tend to be located in places that are at the most risk for sea level rise, hurricanes, and flooding. And also, cities depend on complex systems that are vulnerable to collapse under extreme weather conditions. In other words, when it comes to cities, the CRSI has kind of a zombie apocalypse / Mad Max scenario baked into it. So here's how I did this. CRSI is a county level measure. So I went through and identified high performing counties that contain the core city of a metropolitan statistical area where the metro area has a population of at least 100K and the core city is over 50K, with a couple exceptions I'll talk about later in the video. By the way, I do get a lot of requests for rankings of good smaller and mid-sized cities to move to, and this list ends up being kind of that. It does, I think, end up being a really interesting group of cities, although just the very existence of this video is probably going to annoy all the residents of said cities. Well, sorry, but I don't think I have much choice but to out all of these cities, since what's at stake here is nothing less than the future of humanity. Okay, you've all been warned, so let's get into it. Number 10 is Barnstable Town, Massachusetts, which I'm told actually is a municipality, although I'm still skeptical. You would think with sea level rise, this would not be a good pick for climate refugees, but the CRSI rates this county surprisingly well on the risk domain and very high on governance. Bonus that you're basically in the Northeast corridor, so in the months when like Hyannis gets overrun with tourists, you have great cities you can easily get away to, if those cities end up existing in any recognizable form. Number 9 is Santa Fe, New Mexico. The CRSI likes the social indicators in Santa Fe County, which I guess means catastrophic climate change is gonna be more friendly to the type of people who have huge 401ks, wear lots of turquoise jewelry, and drive SUVs that have like dream catchers hanging from the rearview mirror. I am totally kidding. There are literally tens of people in Santa Fe that don't fit that description. The city is objectively beautiful. I find it extremely walkable, and the train service is pretty incredible for a city this size. Number 8 is Reno, Nevada. Yeah, this does end up being a list of kind of small and mid-sized cities, but why settle for just any little city when you could live in the biggest little city in the world? This is a good time to talk about a couple of bonus criteria that I didn't include in the analysis, but probably should have. One, it's going to be a very positive sign for your city if the mayor follows yours truly on the Bird app, and this one is a W for Reno because Mayor Sheevy is kind of a badass. Another criterion I didn't use: does there exist within the city limits an outlet of the world's foremost purveyor of fine dining? And Reno wins on that one too. Number 7 is Las Cruces, New Mexico, which I honestly struggled to put on this list. It's a big enough city and urban area to be considered, and it is a college town, home of New Mexico State University. But man, it's really hard to pinpoint a cool walkable neighborhood in the university area, which you'd usually expect to find. And it's even hard to pinpoint a walkable downtown. I mean, if I zoom in on the place where the name of the city is in Google Earth, which is usually downtown, there's like some residential subdivisions and athletic fields. I guess the saving grace here is that Las Cruces is part of the El Paso Combined Statistical Area, and I do think that's an underrated city. Okay, I realize Las Cruces isn't all that exciting for a lot of you, and to be fair, I've kind of cultivated an audience of urban snobs. That's okay, I'm one too. But I'm here to tell you, when it comes to climate change, we're gonna have to think a little more creatively. You know, when I do one of my undervalued cities type videos, I get people who ask me, why don't I, CityNerd, select one undervalued city for all of us to descend upon en masse, win every political office, and turn it into an urbanist utopia with a bonus feature being that a lot of these are low population states, and if we get enough insufferable, self-righteous progressives to move to one place, we can definitely turn it solid blue. Although I have to say, when I imagine a scenario like this, it usually has a bit more of a Lord of the Flies narrative arc. Besides, paradoxically, if you all move to the same quote-unquote climate resilient city, it probably has the perverse effect of making it less climate resilient, at least by the EPA's methodology, so just don't do it. Okay, let's get back to it. Number 6 is Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Another city which I'm a little hesitant to recommend because it is northern Idaho, and I'm not gonna say what I'm really thinking, but if you move to northern Idaho, just be prepared to see a truly disproportionate number of Punisher skulls and like grayscale American flags. You know what though? It's Coeur d'Alene. There's gonna be theme parks and super climate friendly jet skiing out on the lake. And you're going to be in the Spokane Combined Statistical Area. As a native Seattleite, it gives me physical pain to praise Spokane, but it is a city that seems like it's on a pretty good trajectory. Number 5 is Grand Junction, Colorado. Look, real talk, you guys, I don't ski or whatever it is people do in this part of the country, so I don't know anything about Grand Junction. It's got California Zephyr Amtrak service, and it's got a cute main street, but it's also a downtown that looks super ripe for all kinds of infill if you got the politics aligned for it. So YouTube watching urbanists, I think you have your marching orders. I do have to say though, the fact that I do not ski doesn't keep me from appreciating the number 4 city, which is Bend, the unofficial capital of Oregon High Desert Country. Possibly the highest density of brew pubs of any metro area in the US, which is probably enough to recommend it all by itself. But Bend is also a pretty good bike city with a population that skews young and active, which I think is good. But you do get a bit of a California remote worker vibe these days, and that extends to the real estate prices, unfortunately. Okay, I've got what I think is a pretty good top 3 on the way, along with honorables and dishonorables. But brief pause so I can harass you into liking the video and subscribing if you've had the sheer audacity not to have done that by now. Connect on various websites, particularly Instagram if you want to follow along with my Spanish misadventures. And direct support via Patreon is super appreciated if you want me to keep producing my weekly nonsense. Honorable mentions, there are a few urban counties that rated really well, but I just couldn't recommend them in good conscience. Honolulu and Maui because they don't need anyone else moving there, honestly. Fairbanks, Alaska because, well, I'm okay with cold weather, but that's ridiculous. And Twin Falls, Idaho because it's Twin Falls, Idaho. I might actually save the worst cities for a different video, but I have to tell you, the Climate Resilience Screening Index really hates one region in particular, and that's the southeastern US. And not even just Florida, it's just bad across the board. Maybe spend more money on infrastructure and social programs and less on college football. Just a thought. Okay, number 3 is Missoula, Montana. Scored extremely well in the social domain, and make of that what you will, but for real, if you've been to Missoula, it is very pretty, and it does have the University of Montana, so you get all the good and the bad of being a college town, which I think is mostly good stuff. Anyway, particularly if you're an outdoorsy person, there are much worse places you can be when the apocalypse comes. Number 2 is Duluth, Minnesota. Scored really well on governance and built environment, which, I think the thing here is the EPA criteria actually likes freeways because I guess it means you can evacuate people quickly. Well, people who have cars anyway. Well, I-35 starts at the Mexican border in Laredo, Texas. And this is how it ends. Not pretty. It almost completely cuts off downtown from the Canal Park district, which is cute, so somebody's got to fix this. Also, Duluth does get cold, but it's got the same downtown skywalk action that Minneapolis does. All I'm saying is, when the rest of the US becomes uninhabitable, feeling Minnesota is actually going to be a good thing. And number 1 is a pretty good number 1 in my opinion. It's Flagstaff, Arizona. Look, I'm not gaming the system, I'm just going off the EPA's list of counties, which basically indicates that smallish inland cities in the western US are where it's at, and Coconino County, Arizona scores the highest out of all the reasonably urban counties. And what's not to love? Flagstaff has a great vibe, it's got a good-sized university, it's got Amtrak service on the Southwest Chief, and if the climate landscape in the US changes drastically in the next couple decades, you're probably going to be okay in Flagstaff. And if you need some perspective and contemplation while it's all coming apart, it's only a couple hours from a site where you can observe billions of years of geologic history. Small consolation, but when the cataclysm drops, you're gonna have to take what you can get. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to the patrons who make it feasible for me to keep doing this every week. If I ever stop making videos, it won't be for lack of ideas. I've got hundreds of them, and the list seems to just get longer, not shorter. Rather, it would be because I have to go back and get a real job. So thanks for supporting. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.